Well, let me say it's good to be back in the saddle again here at Forest Hills. I was in the saddle last Sunday night at Hardy's Chapel. They started their Sunday evening services back, but it's good to be back in the pulpit here. I'm getting so used to, or gotten so used to seeing my lovely face in front of me that it might take a while for me to get back into the swing of things, but perhaps we'll be doing all right. Looking at the world through the eyes of God. And this morning we're going to be talking about filthy language. Christians need to be able to see the world for what it is. The only way to do this is to look at it through the eyes of God. And the only way we can look at it through the eyes of God is to look into His Word and see what He says about what He sees when He looks at the world. In an article in The Preceptor, volume 51, number 3, Warren Berkeley had this to say: "Worldliness remains an issue at the core of our existence and spiritual survival. Though the specific cultural forms of worldly influence may change, the same devil is laboring today with the same purpose as in the first century, to draw us away from spiritual interests to material concerns, to seduce us from high values to carnal behavior, to bring us down into the pit that is a foretaste of eternal destruction." Now, another word for worldliness is simply ungodliness. And I remember hearing years ago a series presented by a church down in Alabama on, I forget what they called it, but anyway, it was just worldliness, another word for worldliness or ungodliness. And that's what we're considering in this series. One fellow told me he never told the congregation when he was preaching a series that they wouldn't know it if he didn't. But all these sermons are related in that they are all related to worldliness, and I am doing this series again by special request. So what do we mean by filthy language? I think that is pretty clear to everybody, in general terms at least. Filthy language cheapens the one speaking. So if you use filthy language, you are cheapening yourself. You are selling yourself short. You are making yourself, in your own mind and in the minds of others, to be a very cheap person. And by cheap person, I mean somebody in a red light district, in a slum, somebody who is in a situation where, by his own activity, that you wouldn't want to be in, that he doesn't want to rise above. And so you cheapen yourself when you engage in filthy language. Filthy language cheapens the one spoken to. If you use filthy language in talking with somebody else, you cheapen them. You think that they are so cheap and so unintelligent, so ungodly, that they will enjoy this kind of talk. And so you cheapen the one spoken to. And thirdly, filthy language cheapens that which is spoken of, whether another human being, a principle, a concept, or an act. And so we don't want to use filthy language. Now, there is some differentiation among many concerning what is filthy language. And so we do want to talk about that a little bit this morning. The act of physical love between a husband and wife is probably that which is most often cheapened by filthy language, especially when it is used with reference to people who are not married to one another. I'm, of course, speaking generally, not universally. Young people especially have difficulty avoiding filthy language due to peer pressure and the desire to be popular. Again, younger people in general, not all young people. And so peer pressure is very heavy. Peer pressure can have a great deal of influence on us. And so we need to be careful who our peers are. You know, in a court of law, everybody has a right to be judged by a jury of their peers. Some people are so low that you could not find 12 people who are on the same level as they are in every respect. But you want people who around you who share your values and who would not cheapen you or themselves or the things about which they speak. And so peer pressure is difficult to overcome, especially for young people. And so young people in particular, but older folks too, need to be careful who they make their peers, who they run around with. In Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Old habits die hard. And the sooner we form good spiritual habits, the easier life will be in the future. As a teenager, I would sneak around and smoke cigarettes, and I didn't, we would pool our money and buy a pack of cigarettes, and we would share them. And when I was about 16 or 18, I guess, I started buying my own. When I became a Christian as 24, I knew that that's not a thing that Christians could do. And while I had been taught that it didn't matter as a youth, once I understood what the Bible taught about salvation and about being right with God on a regular basis, I knew that this was behavior I could not continue to engage in. And so at 24, I broke that habit. It wasn't difficult for me, but I knew men who were in their 40s or 50s who had tried to stop and found it very, very difficult because they had smoked so much longer than I had. So the sooner we break filthy habits, the better off we are. And the more good habits and spiritual habits we establish in our lives as a young person, the better off we will be. And one of the most important areas in which we need to do that is in the way that we speak. Well, who decides what the cuss words are? And I've been asked this question at least twice by two different people. Who decides what the cuss words are? Well, in large part, society decides what constitutes offensive language. But there are different stratuses of society. There is small society, a local congregation, and its members are a loose society. We're not an organized society. Really, when you think about society, is all those people that you interact with, and of course this changes from place to place. We interact with different people at church than we do at work. And so at work we have a different society than we do in worship. And other places that we go, when we go shopping, there's a society there. And so we need to keep these things in mind, that filthy language cheapens me, cheapens the one spoken to, and cheapens that about which one speaks. Let me look at Wikipedia and notice this article about profanity. Profanity is socially offensive language. So here's how I get the idea. Society really determines what constitutes filthy language. Profanity is socially offensive language, which may also be called cursing or swearing, that's the British English, cuss words, American English vernacular, swear words, bad words, or expletives. Used in this sense, profanity is language that is generally considered to be, by certain parts of a culture, to be strongly impolite, rude, or offensive. So that's what we're talking about. Offensive, filthy language, any language that is impolite, rude, or offensive. And again, you may offend some people and not other people by the way that you speak. But we need to consider all of those with whom we have general contact. It can show a debasement of someone or something, or be considered as an expression of strong feeling towards something. In its older, more literal sense, profanity refers to a lack of respect for things that are held to be sacred, which implies anything inspiring, deserving of reverence, as well as behavior showing similar disrespect or causing religious offense. There are a whole lot of people that don't really care who they offend. And that's sad. We should not want to be offensive to anybody. Now, some people are offended when we tell them the gospel. Jesus wasn't offended, but Jesus offended the Pharisees, at least his disciples said so. But how did he offend them? Not by lowering himself to their level or below their level, but by speaking the truth which they did not want to hear. So there are some times when we cannot but offend people who do not want to hear the things that we want to say that God would have us to say. But that's not our fault. But if we deliberately say something that we know some people are going to find offensive, then we might need to examine ourselves in that regard. What about euphemisms? This came up on a Bible discussion page on Facebook. A euphemism is an innocuous or inoffensive word or expression used in place of one that may be found offensive or suggests something unpleasant. Some euphemisms are intended to amuse, while others use bland, inoffensive terms for concepts that the user wishes to downplay. But what may be bland and inoffensive to one may be offensive to others. Euphemisms may be used to mask profanity, refer to taboo subjects such as disability, sex, excretion, or death in a polite way. Not all euphemisms are wrong. In talking with our children, we need to talk about excretion. We need to talk eventually at some point about sex, and we need to talk about disability from time to time. But we don't want to talk about these things in an offensive way. We don't want to talk about these things in a way that cheapens the person or disability that we are referring to, or to cheapen ourselves. So not all euphemisms denigrate. That is, not all euphemisms disparage, or diss is the popular word now, that about which is spoken. Most of us use euphemisms almost every day. The Bible itself uses at least 2 euphemisms for sexual activity: to know and to lie with someone. Those are both euphemisms for the sex act. In Genesis 4:1, for example, Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. He knew her. Did he not know her before this? Well, yeah, he knew her. He had known her from the time that she was created and brought from his rib and brought to him by God. But here it's a particular aspect of to know one carnally. This is referred to generally as carnal knowledge. This results, by the way, from a physical exploration of someone's body. And it is sad that young people get together on a date and explore one another's bodies more than they will explore one another's mind. You can know their body, but you won't know their mind. And so a lot of times, people get married, they don't really know the person they're married to. They just know that they enjoy the curves, etc. And that's sad. In 2 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 14, referring to one of David's sons, Amnon, and his half-sister Tamar, but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Here was a young man who had a half-sister, Tamar. Now, David had several wives, and he had children by, I don't know about every wife having children, but he had children by different wives. Amnon and Tamar were both sons of David, but they had different mothers. Absalom was the full brother to Tamar, in that his mother and Tamar's mother were the same person. But Amnon lusted after his half-sister, and he wanted to take her. There's another euphemism. And he did that. Now, violated, that's also, I don't know why that's not working. I wish somebody told me that. But violated, that's also a euphemism. I guess because I didn't turn that on. That's also a euphemism for sexual activity. But here, both of those are used. The animal breeders use the word cover as a euphemism. I remember when I first heard it, what does that mean? And I looked it up and I found this out. A stallion covers a mare. That's for the purpose of breeding horses. As animal breeders use that term as a euphemism, and there's nothing wrong with it. It is a sight better than the physical terms that some would use. Phonetic euphemism is used to replace profanities, diminishing their intensity. To alter the pronunciation or spelling of a taboo word, such as a swear word, to form a euphemism is known as taboo deformation or minced oath, such as dang, darn, dern, gall dern. Those words in and of themselves don't mean anything. No word has meaning outside of its context. The word hell is not a dirty word, but we need to be careful how we use that. The word damn is not a dirty word, but we need to be careful how we use that word. We should not denigrate sexual activity or anything else that is holy, righteous, and good in its proper place by using filthy expressions, whether explicit, euphemistic, or metaphoric. And by denigrating, I mean using offensively coarse or rude, especially in relation to sexual matters, language. The tongue is full of deadly poison. We need to understand this. In James chapter 3, and beginning in verse 1, now many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. Perfect here does not mean perfectly sinless, it means mature. It takes a mature person to bridle his tongue. And if he can bridle his tongue, he can bridle his whole body. And we need to do that. We cannot afford to let go of the reins of our tongue, much less our whole body. If we put bits in the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. I know we've all watched a Western or two, and we know that by pulling on the reins, the horse rider can get his horse to turn right or left. If you're plowing, you have to say G and haul, to get him to turn. But when you got reins, you put on the right rein, and he turns to the right, put on the left, and he turns to the left. If you pull back hard, then he's going to probably buck you off, raise up both legs. Both front legs. But those little bits, those little metal pieces, go in between, into the back of the mouth, behind the teeth, and the reins are attached to those little bits. He goes on, look at the ships also, that though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. Now, they didn't have steam engines in the first century, much less inboard motors. But all ships were sailing vessels, and they used sails and the wind for their motivation. But the rudder is what gave them direction. And the rudder, accompanied with the turning of the sails, etc., determine what direction they would go. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, if we allow it to, setting on fire the entire course of life, and is set on fire by hell. Relationships generally are formed by the conversation that we have and other interactions that we have with people. The relationships are also broken by our conduct toward other people and our words toward them. We sometimes sing the song, angry words, oh, let them never from the lips unbridled speak. Don't leave your tongue unbridled and speak angry words. Somebody says count to 10 before you respond to anything that makes you angry. And I've seen people that needed to count to 100 because counting to 10 just didn't do the trick. Basically, that's one aspect of what James says in chapter 1. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Don't be too quick to respond to somebody that says something offensive or harsh to you. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed, and it has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. Which means we must bridle the tongue, consciously striving to avoid saying anything that might be construed as soothing. You can't tame the tongue. You need to keep the reins on the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. James goes on to say that we ought not to curse men. I believe verse 9, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people. This is James 3, verse 9. With it we bless our Lord and Father, with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be. One who praises and blesses God while cursing his brethren is a hypocrite. And that's not good. We need to be an honest person. We need to be a person of integrity. A hypocrite is not honest with himself, much less others. He has very little integrity, or will have very little integrity, if it gets out that he is a hypocrite. So we need to be very careful. He goes on to say, does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. A godly person will not intentionally say ungodly things. But again, things we say may be perceived by others to be ungodly when we do not intend them to be. And so, all the more reason to be careful. And if somebody takes offense, you certainly want to apologize and explain that, where you come from, that was common use and nobody ever thought anything about it. Or I know sometimes, even speaking Spanish, there are things that you can say in Spanish in Mexico that will not offend. If you say those same things in Puerto Rico, they will offend people. Because though the words are the same, the meaning is not the same in those two different cultures. So we need to be careful, especially when we're speaking in a foreign language. In Ephesians 4 and verse 29, we read that we are to avoid corrupt talk. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Well, what is corrupting talk? Well, it is just the opposite of what he says we should be able to do, or we should be doing. It is the opposite of good talk for building up. And so, don't corrupt, but speak only that which is good for building up. If at the end of, this is Barclay in his study Bible, David's study Bible, he says, if at the end of our talk with someone, we are closer to one another and to God, then all is well. But if we have erected barriers between ourselves and another, and have left God more distant, then all is not well. The aim of all Christian discussion and of all Christian action is to bring a man nearer to his fellows and to God. That's what we are to be about. That is one reason why it's so important to regularly assemble with the saints. To sing to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, teaching and admonishing one another. We remind one another of great biblical principles when we come together and sing these psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And when we go to God in prayer, especially in a collective sense where one person is representing the congregation to God. And we need to make sure that if it's not us, that we are paying attention to what is said by the one who leads, so that we can say our amen, add our amen to it, whether audible or in our minds. Because that's not just him praying, that's us praying through that one who leads. And same thing is true with reference to Bible study. We need to make sure that we are in tune and that we are considering the things that are said by the speaker, not necessarily taking them as absolute truth, but taking them and considering them in the light of the Word of God. We are to avoid evil speaking in Ephesians 4 verse 31. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Malice is the intention or desire to do evil, ill will. Malice aforethought equals premeditation. It is one thing to be guilty of manslaughter, is another thing to be guilty of murder in the first degree, or murder with malice, as it is called in some jurisdictions. We don't want to have malice toward anybody. We are to avoid shameful speech in Ephesians 5, verses 11 and 12. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. Even the marital bed has its secrets, but the marital bed is sacred. Hebrews 13:4, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, and God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. There are things I know from before I became a Christian that I wish I could forget. I would not even want you to know that I know some of the things that I know. Some of them are from experiences that I wish I'd never had. Some of them are the result of an obsession with certain things I should never have been obsessed with. Don't get me wrong, we must educate ourselves and our children so that we and they may be on guard. We need to tell people about the sexually deviant people they're going to come into contact with. But it is one thing to discuss sexual sins and aberrations, but quite another to take them lightly in our speech. We are to avoid irreverent babble in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 16 beginning. But avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. So irreverent babble may include false teaching. Babble, as we all know, that comes from babbling and talk. Anything that is irreverent is wrong and should be avoided. In 1 Timothy 6, still on the same subject. O Timothy, verse 20, 1 Timothy 6, 20 and 21. O Timothy, guard the deposit, that's the gospel, entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, for by professing it, some have swerved from the faith. Grace be with you. And so Paul had taught Timothy many things. Paul, an inspired man. Timothy may or may not have been, but he learned a lot of things through natural means from the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, in conveying these things to Timothy, was entrusting these things to Timothy. And with that trust was conveyed to Timothy a responsibility to communicate those things. In 2 Timothy 2, he says, what you have heard from me, tell that to others also, that they may be able to teach the truth. We are to avoid careless words. In Matthew 12, verses 36 and 37, Jesus said, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word that they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. And so we're not just concerned with that which is ungodly in and of itself, but anything that is careless. We don't want to engage in careless speech. We want to exercise care in the way that we talk. In Matthew 7:12, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. That is what the law and the prophets, that's what the Old Testament, really, that's how Jesus summed it up. Whatever you do, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. We should never manifest ill will toward anyone. The word hell, as I said before, is not a dirty word in and of itself. But to tell someone to go to hell, or to do anything decadent or degrading, is ill will to the max. We don't want anybody to go to hell. We want everybody that we can influence to go to heaven. And everything we say ought to reflect that desire. In 1 John 3:11 through 15, for this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer. Why? Because hate lies at the foot of murder. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. To harbor ill will against another is to denigrate them, and it is the ill will that often leads to murder. We don't want to harbor ill will toward anyone. Somebody in another place in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, if your brothers persecute you, you pray for them. That's what we ought to do. We ought not to objectify others. Sexual objectification is the act of treating a person socially solely as an object of sexual desire. Objectification more broadly means treating a person as a commodity or an object without regard to their personal dignity. A human being has dignity. Every human being has dignity, even those who denigrate themselves. We all have dignity because we are all created in the image of God. Objectification is most commonly examined at the level of a society, but can also refer to the behavior of individuals and is a type of dehumanization. When we objectify someone, when we look at someone and all we can see is someone upon whom we can consume our lust, then that's objectification. That is dehumanizing that person. We don't want to do that. We're told not to do that. Although both males and females can be sexually objectified, it is mainly associated with the objectification of women, and is an important idea in many feminist theories and psychological theories derived from them. Sexual objectification of girls and women contributes to gender inequality. Now, Not everything that is claimed to be gender unequal is gender unequal. But there are some gender inequalities. Many psychologists associate objectification with a host of physical and mental health risks in women. We don't want to be responsible for anything like that. Treat people with the dignity that they deserve, being in the image of God. And do that when we act, conduct ourselves, do that when we speak to them. Do that even in the thoughts that we have. You know, our thoughts will be judged by our thoughts as well as our words and our actions. And so we want to make sure our thoughts are pure. If our thoughts are pure, our language will be pure. And we will not denigrate anyone or anything. You need to make your heart right with God. We encourage you to come while we stand and sing number 5.